Rain hammered the city of Nashville like a slow heartbeat. The sky hung low and heavy, painted in bruised shades of gray. Streetlights shimmered against puddles, bending light into broken shapes. A man walked alone along the edge of the road, his boots soaked, the hem of his security uniform dark with mud. He carried a torn umbrella, half collapsed against the wind. Every step made a quiet splash. His name was David Carter, 32 years old, the kind of man people stopped noticing long ago. He reached an old brick apartment complex, climbed the narrow staircase, and unlocked the door to a small, dim space that smelled faintly of rain and instant coffee. Inside, his 8-year-old son, Ethan, slept on the couch, curled up under a thin blanket, one hand still resting on a math workbook. The TV flickered in the corner, playing a car commercial. All luxury and laughter, a world that belonged to someone else. David stood there for a long moment, watching the screen's glow dance across his son's sleeping face. Then he turned the TV off. The silence that followed was heavy but peaceful. He bent down, pulled the blanket higher around Ethan's shoulders, and whispered, almost to himself, "One day, kid, one day we'll have more than this." The table beside him was buried under unopened bills and a cold cup of coffee. One envelope stood out. Final notice. Energy bill. He rubbed a hand across his face, exhausted. The light bulb above them flickered twice, buzzing softly before surrendering. Darkness filled the room. David didn't curse. He didn't sigh. He just reached for the old flashlight on the counter and switched it on. The light was weak and yellow, barely enough to cut through the shadows. He sat by the window, opened a thick textbook titled Principles of Electrical Engineering, and flipped through pages worn soft from use. His handwriting filled the margins, numbers, sketches, formulas, all in pencil. The rain drummed harder against the window. The sound was steady, almost rhythmic. He started to write again, mouthing equations under his breath, eyes sharp with focus. While the city around him slept, David studied. He didn't do it for applause or for anyone to see. He did it because hope was a habit he hadn't managed to lose. In another part of the city, the night looked completely different. The Montgomery mansion rose like a palace above the wet streets, glass walls glowing in soft gold, reflecting the movement of expensive cars and laughter. Through the rain, a black sedan glided through the gates. Inside sat Sarah Montgomery, 29, her phone glowing in her hand. She scrolled through messages, half listening to the driver talk about the party waiting inside. David stood at the gate as the car approached, rain dripping from his cap. "Good evening, Miss Montgomery," he said, voice steady but tired. She didn't look up. "Evening," she replied, her tone neutral, distracted. The car continued up the driveway, leaving him in the downpour. David returned to his small booth by the gate, a cramped space with a metal chair, 2 monitors, and a rusted heater that hadn't worked in years. He unwrapped a cheeseburger from a paper bag and took a sip of cold coffee. Outside, the sound of music carried faintly from the mansion, violins, laughter, the clinking of glass. The contrast was sharp, almost cruel. He ate slowly, eyes drifting toward the house. The light from the party reflected in the puddles at his feet, making the night shimmer with an illusion of warmth. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out his notebook, pages full of notes, diagrams, and circuit drawings. The handwriting was messy, but full of life. He turned the flashlight toward the book and started reading again. Sometimes, the only lights he could keep on were the ones inside his own heart. In his mind, another image appeared, the inside of a small garage, years ago. His father stood at a workbench, hands rough, face kind. He held up a small circuit board and smiled. "Never stop building, son." David's jaw tightened. He blinked hard, brushed the memory away, and wrote another line in his notebook. A car passed on the wet road outside, spraying puddles. 2 other guards, Rick and Tom, walked by, laughing loudly. "Hey, Carter!" one of them shouted through the glass. "Still dreaming about being an engineer?" The other snorted. "Man, you can't even pay your light bill. Guess that's why you study in the dark." They laughed. Their footsteps faded. David smiled faintly. "Dreams don't cost a thing," he whispered, and turned another page. The flashlight flickered, dimmed, and went out. He tapped it twice. Nothing. He opened the casing with a small screwdriver, adjusted a loose wire, blew on the contact, and twisted the top back on. A click, and the light returned, stronger than before. He smiled to himself. Even in the dark, he always found a way to keep going. Rain softened outside, turning from a storm to a whisper. He looked out the window toward the distant mansion lights. Somewhere behind those walls, people lived lives built on comfort and certainty. But he built his in silence. And on that silent night, while he worked alone under the trembling light of his flashlight, someone, for the very first time, noticed the glow coming from his little booth at the gate. The storm had passed, but the world still looked tired. Clouds hung low above Nashville, and a thin mist rolled across the quiet hills of Green Hills. The Montgomery mansion stood at the top of the slope, its marble walls gleaming pale under the grey morning light. Inside, Sarah Montgomery sat at her kitchen island, the kind made for magazine covers. The granite was spotless. The air smelled faintly of roasted coffee and lemon polish. She scrolled through emails on her tablet, her phone buzzing every few seconds. Her eyes moved quickly, but her expression barely changed. Her assistant, Maya, moved around the counter, placing folders and schedules neatly in front of her. "The mayor's office called again," Maya said. "They want confirmation for the charity dinner next week." "Tell them to push it," Sarah replied, not looking up. "We're behind on the Clearwater deal." "Yes, ma'am." The house was quiet except for the hum of expensive appliances. The sound of footsteps echoed as Gloria, the housekeeper, entered, carrying a basket of laundry. "You should eat something, Miss Montgomery," Gloria said softly. "You've been running on coffee and work for 3 days." Sarah smiled faintly. "I'll survive." Her phone buzzed again. Another message, another demand. She didn't notice the light outside flickering near the gate, but David did. He had just finished his shift, eyes heavy from studying until dawn. As he walked past the fence, he noticed the broken outdoor lamp blinking like a tired heartbeat. Without thinking, he set his bag down, unscrewed the cover, and began to fix it. He worked quietly, methodically. A twist of wire, a quick adjustment. The light steadied, glowing warm and constant. From the second-floor window, Sarah happened to glance up from her screen. Through the mist, she saw a man in uniform crouched by the lamp, hands steady, face calm. Something about it caught her off guard. The simplicity of it, the focus. For once, she didn't look away immediately. Down below, David brushed his hands off, picked up his bag, and walked toward the bus stop. The repaired light stayed bright behind him, a small victory nobody would mention. On the bus, the seats were damp from the rain. David sat by the window, opening his old textbook again. The city passed in muted colors, gray sidewalks, neon signs still blinking from the night before. A woman beside him leaned over. "You studying for something?" He smiled faintly. "Trying to finish what I started." She nodded with quiet respect. "Good for you, man. Don't stop." He looked down at his notes. His father's handwriting, faint and smudged, filled the inside cover. "Never stop building, son." Outside, children walked to school with oversized backpacks. Construction workers gathered around trucks, coffee in hand. The world was already awake, already moving. David felt like he was running beside it, still a few steps behind, but not giving up. At that same hour, Sarah sat in her office, surrounded by glass walls and high ceilings. Her business partner, Mark Henderson, stood by the window with a cup of espresso, staring at the view of the city below. "If we close this deal by Friday," Mark said, "we'll walk away with at least 5 million, maybe more." Sarah leaned over a blueprint. "And the families living there now?" "They'll get a payout," Mark said casually. "They'll figure it out." Her pen paused over the paper. "Make sure it's fair. I don't want bad press," Mark chuckled. "Since when do you care about bad press?" Her voice went colder. "Since people started watching everything I do." She didn't mean investors. She meant something else, or someone. The image of that quiet guard, kneeling in the rain to fix a light he didn't have to fix, came back to her unexpectedly. There had been no complaint, no hesitation, just quiet action. Late that afternoon, the sky cleared into a soft golden hue. David walked back toward the mansion for his night shift. Gloria was leaving, her coat draped over one arm. "Evening, David," she said. "You ever sleep?" He smiled. "I'll sleep when the lights stop going out." She laughed, shaking her head. "You're something else, boy." As the night deepened, the mansion lights dimmed room by room until only a few glowed upstairs. In the security booth, David adjusted the monitors, checked the schedule, then opened his book again. Hours passed in silence. Then headlights swept across the driveway, Sarah's car returning from the city. She stepped out, heels clicking against the stone. Her driver waited near the door. David looked up briefly, then back at his notes. But Sarah paused. Through the small window of the booth, she saw the faint beam of a flashlight inside. David sat under it, writing, eyes sharp, lips moving silently as he calculated something in his notebook. There was a strange calm around him, the kind of focus that doesn't ask for attention but demands it anyway. Sarah stood there for several seconds. The night air was cold against her skin. She found herself wondering what kind of man studies like that. In a uniform, in the dark, after a full day of work. Her driver's voice broke the moment. "Miss Montgomery?" She blinked, realizing she'd been staring. "I'm coming." As she walked inside, she glanced one last time over her shoulder. The light in the booth still glowed, the man inside still worked. And though she couldn't explain it, something about that quiet determination unsettled her. Not in a bad way, but in the kind that makes a person question their own reflection. That night, David kept studying, unaware that his small light had already reached further than he could imagine. The next morning, Nashville woke under a washed-out sky. Puddles shimmered on the streets, and the scent of wet asphalt lingered in the air. At the Montgomery mansion, everything looked freshly polished. Marble steps gleaming, trimmed hedges perfectly aligned, the kind of perfection that hides its price. Down by the gate, David Carter began his shift. He arrived early, as always, hair still damp from the shower, uniform pressed even though the fabric had faded from too many washes. The booth was small but clean, organized like a soldier's post. He liked things in order. It made the world feel less heavy. He checked the cameras, the locks, the schedule. Every small task mattered to him, even if nobody noticed. "Morning, Carter." The voice came from behind. Rick and Tom, the other two guards. Both had been there longer, both older, both loud. They carried themselves with the kind of easy arrogance that comes from knowing nobody expects you to care. David nodded politely. "Morning." Rick leaned against the booth door, chewing gum. "Man, you still got that notebook with you? What's in there? Love poems?" Tom chuckled. "Nah, it's his little genius book. He thinks he's going to be an engineer or something." David smiled faintly. "Just keeping my mind busy." Rick grinned. "You know what keeps my mind busy? Payday." The two men laughed. David didn't. When they finally left, he opened the notebook on the counter. The pages were full of neat sketches, circuits, power systems, ideas. He'd started them years ago and kept adding every night. There was a quiet pride in it, even if it never left that small book. Later that morning, the mansion's gates buzzed with deliveries. Florists brought fresh arrangements. Caterers unloaded silver trays for another meeting. David directed them all, polite and efficient. Inside the house, Sarah Montgomery was preparing for an investor lunch. From the office window, she saw David handling the traffic outside. He never raised his voice, never looked rushed. The workers listened to him. They didn't mock him. Her gaze lingered for a moment before she returned to her conversation with Mark Henderson. "Sarah," Mark said, scrolling through his phone, "we've got a problem with the Riverbend project. The city wants proof that we're rehousing the families. They're already complaining on social media." Sarah frowned. "Then do it. Give them what they need." Mark sighed. "You say that like it's free." She didn't reply. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds. David shielded his eyes with his hand and noticed the side gate mechanism sticking. He grabbed a wrench and crouched to fix it. Rick and Tom watched from the shade, smirking. "There he goes again," Rick said, "fixing stuff that ain't his problem." Tom laughed. "You think she's going to give him a medal for that?" They started imitating him, crouching, pretending to twist a wrench, laughing like kids. One of the delivery guys joined in, shaking his head. David heard them but didn't look up. He tightened the last bolt and stood. The gate swung smoothly on its track. He tested it twice, satisfied. "Guess I'll take that medal now," he said lightly. Rick smirked. "Yeah, dream on, Professor." As the laughter faded, David walked away without anger. He'd learned long ago that silence was stronger than argument. At lunch, the staff gathered in the small cafeteria behind the mansion. The air smelled of coffee and reheated food. David sat alone, eating quietly, while flipping through his notes. Across the room, Rick started again. "Hey, Carter, what's that? Homework?" Tom added. "Maybe he's building us a spaceship." A few others chuckled. The sound filled the room, bouncing off the tile walls. David closed the notebook gently, stood, and tossed his trash. He didn't say a word. Just as he reached the door, Sarah entered with Maya. The laughter stopped instantly. She wasn't supposed to be there. People froze mid-bite. She was discussing something with Maya about the guest list, her voice calm but firm. Then her eyes lifted, meeting David's for just a second. For a heartbeat, something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, maybe respect. Then he gave a small nod and stepped aside for her to pass. Rick muttered under his breath, "Careful, Carter. Don't fall for the boss." Laughter again. Quieter this time, uncertain. David paused but didn't turn. His jaw tightened for half a breath, then he walked out into the sunlight. Outside, he sat on the bench near the fence. The air smelled like cut grass. He opened his notebook again and began to write. "You can't teach a man who doesn't want to learn." The sentence stayed on the page for a while. Then he underlined it. Later, as dusk fell, the air turned cool and still. David returned to his post, adjusting the security feeds. He could see the reflection of the mansion's lights in the puddles, gold flickers over dark water. Inside, laughter echoed faintly from the dining room. Sarah's voice rose above it once, calm but commanding. Then silence. David looked at the monitors again, thinking about how far away those voices sounded, not just in distance, but in kind. Still, he smiled faintly. He wasn't angry, just more certain of what he wanted. Mockery doesn't break a dream. It tests its foundation, and his was built to last. By late morning, the mansion was alive with quiet urgency. Workers moved like clockwork, arranging tables, testing microphones, preparing for an investor lunch that could shape the Montgomery name for another decade. Every detail mattered, every second counted. Then something went wrong. The main security system froze. Cameras flickered, then went black. The gate stood open. The monitors in the booth buzzed with static. Rick smacked the side of the console. "Come on, not today." Tom leaned back, arms crossed. "Just tell him we're rebooting. Nobody'll notice." David entered the booth holding a clipboard, his uniform still damp from the morning drizzle. "What's going on?" Rick rolled his eyes. "Systems dead, cameras, gate, everything. Great timing, huh?" David studied the screen for a few seconds. Then he crouched by the panel, removed the back plate, and ran his fingers along the cables. His movements were calm, deliberate. He didn't guess. He looked, listened, traced. Rick snorted. "You're not fixing that thing. It's been glitching for weeks." David's voice stayed quiet. "Maybe it's just tired of being ignored." He noticed a faint buzz coming from the relay near the floor, a smell of burnt plastic. He unplugged one cable, twisted it slightly, and smiled when the hum changed tone. "Loose ground," he murmured. Tom frowned. "You speak in English, man?" David grinned. "Means it'll work in a second." He tightened the screw, wiped the dust with his sleeve, and flipped the switch. The monitors blinked back to life, one by one, in perfect sequence. The gate clicked shut with a steady mechanical sigh. Rick froze. No way. Tom leaned closer to the screens. How the hell did you do that? David stood, brushing his hands on his pants. Someone wired it wrong. I just listened. They stared at him. He didn't look proud, just calm, as if this sort of miracle was ordinary. Inside the mansion, Sarah heard the faint sound of the gate closing. She glanced out the window. The yard looked flawless again, no sign of panic or error. She didn't know what happened, but somehow everything was fine. Back in the booth, Rick muttered, "Guess those books finally paid off, huh?" David chuckled softly. "Guess so." A knock at the window interrupted them. It was Gloria holding a thermos and a paper cup. "Coffee's on me, sweetheart. You earned it today." David smiled. "Thanks, Miss Gloria." She winked. "Keep fixing the world one wire at a time." He poured the coffee, took a slow sip, and leaned back in the chair. The rich, bitter warmth felt like victory. Outside, the staff returned to their rhythm. No one realized how close everything had come to collapsing, but one person had noticed. From her office upstairs, Sarah stood near the window again. Her meeting was underway, investors speaking fast, screens glowing with graphs and promises. Yet her attention kept drifting toward the man by the gate, now sitting in silence, a cup of coffee in hand. For the first time, she saw him not as a uniform, but as a person, focused, steady, different. The meeting ended smoothly. A city official even complimented Sarah on how impeccably organized her operation was. She smiled, but her thoughts were elsewhere. When the guests left, she walked to the balcony for a breath of air. Down below, David was inspecting the cameras again, making notes in his small book. The sun caught on the page, turning the words into a flash of light she couldn't quite read. Rick passed by, clapping him on the shoulder. "Hey, Carter, looks like we owe you lunch." David smiled. "Just doing my job." But everyone knew it was more than that. He took his pen and wrote quietly in his notebook. "Every problem has a pattern. You just have to see it." Then he closed it carefully, almost like he was closing a secret. That evening, as the sky dimmed into a soft orange haze, Sarah stood by her office window again, phone forgotten in her hand. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "Who are you, David Carter?" Outside, the man in the booth adjusted the camera feeds one last time. Everything worked perfectly. The world kept moving. Cars, voices, laughter. But for once, something inside those walls had changed. Respect had quietly entered the room, and it had chosen its side. The next morning came quietly, painted in soft gold and long shadows. Nashville had one of those rare autumn days when everything looked cleaner than it really was. The air crisp, the trees lit like they were on fire. David arrived at the mansion earlier than usual. He liked mornings. They gave him a sense of order before the noise began. The gate creaked softly as he opened it, the grass still wet from dew. He took a deep breath and smiled to himself. When he reached the booth, a paper bag was sitting on the desk. A note taped to it read, "Breakfast, Gloria." Inside was a ham sandwich and a cup of black coffee, still warm. He chuckled quietly. Small kindnesses like that felt rare these days. As he ate, he checked the monitors. Every camera running perfectly, every gate sensor smooth. For once, nothing was broken. It felt good. Across the yard, Sarah's car pulled up earlier than usual, too. She stepped out wearing jeans and a white blouse instead of her usual sharp business suits. There was something lighter in her that morning, though she'd never admit it. David opened the gate for her and nodded. "Morning, Miss Montgomery." She hesitated for a beat longer than normal. "Morning, David." It was the first time she'd said his name. He blinked, a little surprised. But she was already walking toward the house, phone pressed to her ear, voice fading into the distance. He smiled faintly. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. Around mid-morning, the landscaper accidentally clipped an underground wire while trimming near the fountain. Half the garden lights went out. Rick called it in. "Not my problem," he said, shrugging. David grabbed his toolbox without a word. He followed the wire trail, crouched by the fountain, and tested the current with a small multimeter. A clean break. He stripped the ends, spliced a new section, sealed it with tape, and tested again. The lights flickered back to life, glowing across the garden like a slow sunrise. From her office window, Sarah saw it happen, the lights returning one by one, the man standing quietly by the fountain, checking his work. "Who fixed the garden lights?" she asked out loud. Gloria, who was dusting the shelf nearby, smiled. "David, of course. That man doesn't wait for orders. He just does what's right." Sarah said nothing, but the corners of her mouth lifted slightly. Later that afternoon, when the catering team arrived for an event setup, one of them asked for help unloading equipment. Rick and Tom pretended not to hear. David walked over, lifted one of the heavy boxes onto his shoulder, and carried it inside without a complaint. "Thanks, man," the caterer said. "Didn't expect the security guy to jump in." David shrugged. "Doesn't cost much to help." By evening, the story had already spread quietly through the staff. The guard who fixed everything. The guy who never complained. The one who worked all night and still smiled in the morning. Sarah didn't say anything yet, but she started to notice the small things. The cameras never glitched again. The gate never jammed. The lights stayed on through every storm. It wasn't luck. It was him. One night, as she left her office late, she stopped by the booth again. David was there, as always, a small light glowing over his notes. She tapped gently on the glass. He turned, startled. "Everything working fine tonight?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. All good." Her eyes landed on the book beside his notebook, Advanced Electrical Systems. "You study this every night?" He nodded. "When I can." "Why engineering?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. He smiled softly. "Because I like fixing things that people give up on." Her expression softened, but she didn't answer right away. Finally she said, "That's a rare thing, David." He looked at her, and for the first time, she wasn't just his employer. She was another human being who understood the quiet weight of trying. A second passed, then she nodded and turned to leave. As she walked away, David whispered under his breath, almost smiling, "Thank you, ma'am." That night, as she climbed the stairs to her room, Sarah caught her reflection in the glass, and for the first time in years, she didn't see control or distance. She saw humility. Down below, the booth light stayed on. For the rest of the week, no one mocked David. Rick even asked him, half embarrassed, to check his radio wiring. Tom offered him an extra cup of coffee. Respect had arrived quietly, just like the man who earned it. And though no one said it aloud, every person working in that mansion felt it. Something had shifted. The man they laughed at yesterday was the one they now depended on. And Sarah, the woman who never noticed, had begun to see him clearly. The following week began quietly, but something in the air felt heavier, as if life itself was holding its breath. The Montgomery mansion prepared for another grand event. A charity gala meant to raise funds for a housing project downtown. Photographers, decorators, and assistants moved in and out like waves. It was the kind of night Sarah Montgomery excelled at. The kind that made headlines, the kind that looked good in magazines, but not everything about this night would shine. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds gathered over the city again. Nashville rain had a way of showing up when least wanted. The wind picked up, rustling the trees, bending the flags along the driveway. David stood at the main gate, checking the systems one more time. Everything worked perfectly. Every wire, every latch. He'd made sure of it. Rick passed by, holding an umbrella. "You hear the news?" David glanced over. "No, what's up?" "Some protest downtown near the new housing site. People angry about being moved out. Guess that project's Miss Montgomery's baby." David frowned. "People losing their homes." "Yeah. Business, man. That's how it goes." Rick shrugged and walked away. David watched the rain start to fall again, a slow, steady rhythm. His jaw tightened. Inside the mansion, Sarah stood in front of a full-length mirror as a stylist pinned her hair. Maya read off updates from her tablet. "Protests already trending online," Maya said. Some of the families are blaming the project. Reporters might ask about it tonight. Sarah took a breath. We'll handle it. Stick to the talking points. Charity, community, hope. Of course. But her reflection didn't match her words. There was hesitation in her eyes. Down by the gate, a delivery van pulled in through the rain. The driver stepped out, carrying catering supplies. A young man, maybe 20, wearing a soaked hoodie. David noticed him limp slightly. "Hey, you okay there?" The kid nodded weakly. "Yeah, just twisted my ankle. It's nothing." But when he tried to lift a box, he winced and nearly fell. David caught him. "Easy," David said. "Sit down for a second." The kid's face was pale. He looked exhausted. "I need to get this inside before they start yelling." "You'll get it there," David said gently. "Just not like this." He radioed for help, but no one answered. Everyone was busy inside. He hesitated, then took the box himself. By the time he reached the kitchen entrance, Gloria was there. "Lord, David, you're soaked." He nodded toward the young man limping behind him. "He hurt his leg," Gloria gasped. "Get him a chair." David grabbed a towel and handed it to the boy. "Rest here. I'll bring the rest of your load." "You don't have to, man," the kid said. "I know," David replied, "but someone should." He made 2 more trips in the pouring rain, carrying boxes heavier than they looked. His uniform clung to him, drenched and cold, but he didn't slow down. When he finally finished, he stopped to catch his breath, and that's when he saw her. Sarah stood by the kitchen door, holding a wineglass, her eyes fixed on him. "Why didn't you call for someone?" she asked. "Everyone was busy," he said simply. "You didn't have to do all that." "I know." "Then why?" He met her gaze. "Because people were counting on me even if they didn't know it." Something flickered in her expression. Surprise first, then reflection. She wasn't used to hearing that kind of answer. "You should dry off," she said softly. "I'll be fine." "Still," she insisted. "Come inside for a minute." Gloria handed him a towel, shaking her head. "You're gonna catch your death out there." David smiled. "Rain doesn't kill people, Miss Gloria. Giving up does." Sarah heard that. She didn't comment, but the words lingered in her mind long after he left. That night the gala went on as planned. Bright lights, smiling guests, cameras flashing. Sarah delivered her speech flawlessly. She spoke about community, compassion, and building a better future for everyone. The crowd applauded, but as she spoke those words, she thought of the boy with the hurt leg and the man who carried his boxes through the storm without being told. When the event ended, she found Gloria near the hall. "That guard," she asked, "does he always do things like that?" Gloria chuckled. "Like what, Mom?" "Go out of his way for people." "Always. Been that way since the first day I met him." Sarah looked out toward the gate. The rain had stopped, and there was David, standing upright, drenched again, watching the last of the guests leave, a flashlight glowing faintly in his hand. He didn't know she was watching. He didn't need to. Some people live their purpose quietly. Others just happened to see it, and that night Sarah Montgomery saw her purpose reflected in a man who had almost nothing except integrity. 2 nights later, the storm came back, louder, angrier, darker. Rain slammed against the mansion gates like 1,000 small hammers. Wind howled through the trees, bending branches until they cracked. Lightning flashed over the city, painting everything white for half a second at a time. Inside the Montgomery estate, the power flickered twice, then went out completely. Total darkness. Sarah was in her office alone, typing when the lights died. For the first time in years, she froze. The silence after the power cut was sharp, almost frightening. Her computer screen blinked off. The hum of machines disappeared. Then, in the distance, she saw it. One faint light, down by the gate. David's flashlight. He was already moving through the rain, his coat soaked, the beam cutting through the wind. Sarah grabbed her phone, tried to call the maintenance crew. No signal. The storm had taken down a cell tower nearby. She looked out again. David was checking the main fuse box by the side wall, crouched under a sheet of rain. Maya, her assistant, rushed in. Everything's out, even the generator. The backup didn't kick in. Sarah's voice was tense. How's the security system? Offline. Nothing's recording. Should I call the power company? They won't reach us in this weather. Sarah turned back toward the window. The storm flashed again. And in that light, she saw David climbing a ladder toward the transformer box near the garage. "He's going to get himself killed," she whispered. David's boots slipped slightly on the wet rungs, but he steadied himself. He'd done this before, not here, but years ago, in his father's workshop, repairing circuits after long blackouts. He knew the danger, but danger didn't scare him. Failure did. He reached the top, rain hitting his face, and checked the main circuit. The surge protector was fried. A lightning strike had shorted half the system. The generator had failed because its ground wire had melted. He'd seen this pattern before. He could fix it. Rick appeared below him, holding a flashlight. "Carter, get down! You're out of your mind!" David shouted over the wind. "If I don't fix this, the whole system could burn when power comes back." Rick shook his head. "Then wait for a pro." David looked down, calm but certain. "Sometimes you don't have time to wait." He jumped down, boots splashing into puddles, and ran to the generator shed. The small metal building rattled in the wind. Inside, it smelled of oil and ozone. He opened the panel. Wires hissed softly, smoke curling from a melted fuse. He used a rag to wipe the moisture, grabbed his toolkit, and got to work. Sarah watched from the window, heart pounding. She wasn't used to feeling helpless, but tonight she couldn't do anything except watch the man she'd once barely noticed risk his life to keep her world from going dark. The storm raged louder. Thunder shook the glass. David worked fast, cutting a burned section of cable, twisting a new line, securing it with tape. His fingers bled from the metal edges. He didn't stop. He whispered to himself as he worked, almost like a prayer. "Never stop building, son." Lightning cracked again, close enough to shake the ground. For a second, everything froze. Then the generator coughed, sputtered, and came alive. Lights flickered across the mansion. The hum of power filled the night again. Sarah gasped. Maya exhaled. "It's back," she said. "He did it." Down by the gate, David leaned against the wall, breathing hard, rain still pouring down his face. He was drenched, exhausted, but smiling faintly. Rick walked over, eyes wide. "Man, I don't know how you did that." David just said, "Pattern. Always a pattern." Gloria came running from the kitchen door with a towel. "You're going to catch pneumonia, boy." David laughed weakly. "As long as the lights stay on, I'll live." From the balcony, Sarah stood silently, watching him. Her phone buzzed with messages again, the world coming back to life. But she didn't pick it up. She couldn't. Something inside her had shifted. The man she once saw as invisible had just held her empire together with his bare hands. Later that night, when the storm finally broke and the clouds began to part, Sarah walked down the long hallway, barefoot, the marble floor cold under her feet. She stopped by the window again. Down at the booth, David sat drying his hands, writing something in his notebook. The small light glowed through the glass. He looked tired, completely spent, but there was peace in him, the kind that comes from doing what's right, not what's required. Sarah whispered softly to the empty hallway, "Thank you, David." Outside, the rain eased into silence. Inside, the woman who had everything realized for the first time that she had something money could never buy: trust. Morning drifted in slow and pale, like the city was waking up from a bad dream. The storm had finally moved on. Nashville smelled like wet leaves and clean concrete. David walked Ethan to school with a thermos in one hand and his notebook tucked under his arm. Ethan held his palm tight, jumping puddles like they were lakes he could conquer. "Dad," Ethan said, breath fogging in the cool air, "can I do the science fair this year?" David smiled. "You kidding? You've been planning it all summer. I want to build a little wind turbine, like the ones online. Think we could make the light bulb turn on?" "We'll make it sing," David said. "Deal." He watched his son run through the school doors and disappear into a tide of backpacks. For a second, The world felt simple. Then life tapped his shoulder. By noon, he was back at the mansion. The staff whispered about the storm, about how the generator came back like a miracle. Rick tried to play it cool, but he gave David a nod that wasn't sarcastic. That nod meant more than anyone knew. Sarah asked him to stop by the side hallway outside her office. The space was quiet, lined with black and white photos of city buildings and ribbon cuttings, and her father shaking hands with mayors. She stood there, no makeup crew, no press, just a woman with questions she couldn't file away. "Your hands," she said, noticing the thin cuts along his knuckles. "You should get those cleaned." "They're fine," he said halfway to a smile. "What you did last night." She paused. "You could have been seriously hurt. Sometimes the cost of waiting is worse." Her eyes moved to the edge of his wallet, peeking from his pocket, where a corner of aged paper stuck out. "What's that, if you don't mind me asking?" He pulled it free, as careful as if it might crumble. It was an old letter, creased into the shape of a habit. He didn't unfold all of it. He just held it like something you don't lend to anyone. "My dad," he said quietly. "He wrote it when I left for college, Tennessee Tech, scholarship. I thought I had it all figured out." Her expression softened. "You left?" "He got sick. Needed help. I told myself I'd finish later, you know. Later has a way of finding excuses." He leaned against the wall, not to look cool, just to stay standing inside a memory that hit harder than he expected. "We had this little garage behind the house. Would smell. Coffee in a chipped mug. He'd teach me how to solder on a piece of scrap while the radio played ball games. When the storms came through, our street always went dark first. He'd light a lantern, we'd laugh, we'd fix what we could. He'd say the same thing every time." David lifted the letter. "Never stop building, son." He finally unfolded it. The handwriting was rough, but strong. Her eyes slid over the words without reading them fully. She didn't need to. The gravity was in the way he held the page. "He died during a summer storm," David said. No drama in his voice, just truth. "Home hospice, power out, oxygen failing. I ran to the car, tore wires from an old inverter I'd made with him. I thought I could bridge the battery, keep the machine alive. I was close. I swear I was close." He swallowed. "I wasn't fast enough." Silence settled. Not heavy. Sacred. "I don't blame the power company," he went on, "or the weather. I don't even blame the landlord who never fixed the wiring. I blame the clock. It never negotiates." Sarah's voice was gentle. "You blame yourself. Every day I don't learn, every day I don't get better at this, I feel like I'm letting him die again. That's why I keep wires in my pockets and books in my bag. That's why I fix lights that aren't my job." She let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. "I didn't know. You weren't supposed to." What about Ethan's mother?" she asked, then immediately regretted how fast it came out. "Sorry, that's not my place." He shook his head. "No, it's okay. We were young, scared. After my dad passed, money got tight. I took second shifts. She got tired of the dark, of the late rent and broken cars and a man who smelled like oil and worry. One day, she left a note on the kitchen table and moved to Ohio. Said she'd send for Ethan when she got settled. 3 years later, I'm still making his lunches." "I'm sorry," Sarah said, and the words didn't sound like charity. They sounded like a woman remembering a younger version of herself, standing in a hallway with a choice no one else could quite understand. She touched the letter with her eyes again, not her hands. "My mom died when I was 16, she said carefully. "My father turned grief into a business plan. I turned it into a calendar with no white space. Sometimes I think I've been working ever since to outrun a feeling I don't have a name for." He didn't say, "I understand." He just held her gaze like a steady light. "You ever think about going back?" she asked. "Finishing school?" "Every night," he said. "But life keeps asking me to pass the plate first. Maybe it's time someone else picked up a piece of it." He opened his mouth to answer, but his phone buzzed, a message from the school. "Ethan feverish. Nurse's office. Please come." He looked at the screen, then at her. No explanation needed. "Go," Sarah said, already pulling keys from her pocket. "Take my car. I can take the bus." "Take the car," she repeated, not as a boss, but as a person who just decided what matters. "Bring him home." He hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded. "Thank you." And as he left down the hall, the old letter still warm in his pocket, she watched him go with a feeling she hadn't planned for. Something bigger than gratitude, sharper than respect. It felt like a door opening, and on the other side of that door, a choice waited for both of them. The next morning, the world felt softer. The sky stretched pale blue over Nashville, washed clean by the storm. The mansion's lawn glittered with dew, sunlight bouncing off every droplet. For once there was no urgency, no shouting over radios, no broken lights. Just quiet. David arrived later than usual, not by choice. Ethan had spent the night shivering, his fever high, his small hand burning against David's palm. He'd sat awake for hours, pressing a cold towel to his son's forehead, whispering stories until the boy finally fell asleep. Now David's eyes were heavy, his uniform wrinkled, his body running on coffee and willpower. But he showed up, because showing up was what men like him did. At the gate, Rick gave him a sympathetic nod. "Heard your kid's sick. You should have called off, man." David shrugged. "If I stay home, rent doesn't pay itself." Rick sighed. "You're something else, Carter." Inside, Sarah sat in her office surrounded by silence. Her calendar blinked with reminders, but she couldn't focus. She kept thinking about the way David had told that story, about the storm, his father, and the clock that wouldn't wait. The image of him climbing the ladder in the rain haunted her. So did his face when he talked about Ethan. There was a kind of strength in his pain, something she hadn't seen in anyone for a long time. She pushed her chair back, stood, and made a decision that surprised even herself. When she reached the gate, David was adjusting the security cameras. He turned, startled to see her there. "Miss Montgomery," he said, straightening. "Everything okay?" She nodded slowly. "You look exhausted." He smiled politely. "Long night. My boy caught a fever. He'll be okay." "I hope so. He's tough." She hesitated, studying him for a moment before speaking again. "David, I've been thinking about what you told me. About your father, about school." He shifted awkwardly. "I shouldn't have said all that. I didn't mean to." "I'm glad you did," she interrupted gently, "because it made me realize something. You've been fixing everything around here. Lights, systems, problems, except your own chance to move forward. That doesn't sit right with me." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I made a few calls this morning," she said. "A friend of mine teaches at the community college in Nashville. They have a night program in electrical engineering. I told her about you." David froze. "You do what?" "She said there's one spot left in the scholarship program. It's part-time, flexible hours. You'd have to apply this week." He stared at her, stunned. The words didn't fit easily into his world. "Miss Montgomery, Sarah," she corrected softly. "Call me Sarah." He blinked. "I can't accept that. I wouldn't even know how to start." "You already started," she said. "You've been studying in the dark for months. You just need a door. Let this be it." For the first time since he'd met her, she wasn't the polished executive giving orders. She was just a woman offering someone a chance. "I don't want charity," he said quietly. "This isn't charity, David. It's recognition. I've built my whole life on the idea that the best people are the ones already sitting at the table. Maybe I was wrong." He looked away, fighting the lump in his throat. "I don't know if I can balance everything. Work, Ethan, school." "Then I'll help," she said simply. "Whatever you need. I can adjust your shifts, cover tuition, even help with transportation. You've earned it 10 times over." He shook his head. "You don't have to do this." "I know," she said, smiling faintly, "but I want to." Silence filled the space between them, the kind that feels sacred. Finally, David said, "When my dad died, I stopped believing anyone saw me. Not really, but right now, I think he'd be proud." Sarah nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure he has a reason to be." For a moment, the world around them went quiet again. No wind, no machines, no distance. Just two people standing on opposite sides of a gate, realizing it wasn't a barrier anymore. Gloria appeared at the corner, holding a cup of coffee, eyes wide, as she took in the scene. "I don't know what's happening here," she said with a grin, "but I like it." David laughed softly. "Guess my day just changed," Gloria winked. "Looks like your destiny finally showed up." Sarah chuckled under her breath, shaking her head. "She's right, you know." David folded his arms, still half in disbelief. "I don't even know how to thank you." "You don't have to," she said. "Just don't waste the chance." "I won't." As Sarah walked back toward the mansion, she glanced over her shoulder once more. David stood there, watching her go, the faintest hint of hope crossing his tired face. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like the man in the dark. He felt seen. And somewhere deep inside him, that old phrase came back, clear and steady as his father's voice. "Never stop building, son." The night of the city contract signing arrived like a storm in disguise, calm skies hiding the weight underneath. The Montgomery mansion shone brighter than ever. Strings of lights hung across the courtyard, cameras from local news stations lined the driveway, and guests in black suits and glittering dresses stepped out of sleek cars under the warm Tennessee air. This wasn't just another gala. It was the night. The one that would seal Sarah's biggest project yet, a multi-million-dollar partnership with the city to develop sustainable housing. David was on duty at the gate, posture straight, uniform crisp. But his mind was elsewhere, on Ethan's smile that morning before school, and on the acceptance letter sitting folded in his pocket. The scholarship was official. Sarah had done it. He hadn't told anyone yet, not even Gloria. For the first time in years, he felt the air move differently around him, lighter, alive. Inside the mansion, everything gleamed. The hum of conversations, the clinking of glasses, the soft sound of a jazz trio playing near the marble staircase. Sarah moved through the room gracefully, shaking hands, laughing, answering questions with practiced charm. But behind that elegance, her eyes searched now and then toward the security feed monitor across the hall, where one of the cameras showed David at the gate, calm and steady as always. Then, at 8:42 p.m., the lights flickered. A second later, they went out. The music stopped mid-note. A hush fell over the room. Gasps filled the air. Outside, the garden lights died one by one until only moonlight remained. Sarah froze. "This can't be happening," she whispered. Maya rushed in, phone in hand. "Main power just failed. Backup generator isn't kicking in." Sarah's heart raced. "Not again." David heard the same silence from the booth. He grabbed his flashlight, sprinted toward the generator shed. Rain began to fall, sudden and heavy, like the sky had waited for this exact moment. When he reached the shed, the metallic door rattled in the wind. He pulled it open and was hit by a wave of heat. Smoke. The generator was sparking, overloading. He shouted into his radio, "Everyone stay clear of the main line. Don't touch the switches." Rick's voice crackled back. "It's the surge protectors. They're fried." David coughed through the smoke. "Where's the manual bypass?" Rick hesitated. "There isn't one." Inside the mansion, guests murmured in confusion. The mayor checked his watch. The cameras powered down. Every minute without light was another nail in Sarah's credibility. She could feel her years of reputation slipping away. She turned to Gloria. "Where's David?" "Where do you think?" Gloria said softly. "Where he always is, fixing what no one else will." David ripped open the generator's access panel, lightning flashing behind him. He saw it instantly. The secondary ground wire had melted again, just like last time. But this time, the fuse box itself was warped, the metal casing burned. He needed to reroute the current manually or risk the system catching fire. He grabbed his tools, hands shaking from the heat. The storm howled harder. He remembered his father's voice. "Never stop building, son." "Okay," he whispered. "Let's build." He yanked off his wet jacket, used it to insulate his arm, and reached into the live circuit. Sparks jumped, burning his sleeve. The pain was sharp, but he didn't stop. He twisted the copper wire, looped it through the ground pin, and secured it with a single metal clamp he carried in his pocket. One he'd found weeks ago and kept just in case. The smell of ozone filled the air. Back at the mansion, candles flickered to life as Sarah tried to calm the guests. "Just a brief power interruption," she said, voice trembling but strong. "Please stay seated." Seconds stretched like hours. Then a deep hum rolled through the ground. Lights flickered, once, twice. Then the entire mansion came back to life, brighter than before. Applause broke out. The orchestra picked up mid-note. People laughed in relief, clinking glasses again, the danger already forgotten. Sarah didn't smile. She ran. Outside, she found David sitting on the ground near the generator, rain pouring over him. His hands were black with soot, his knuckles cut, his breathing shallow. But he was alive. The system purred behind him, flawless. "David!" she called, kneeling beside him. "You're bleeding." He gave a faint grin. "Guess I passed the test." She shook her head, torn between anger and awe. "You could have been killed. Wouldn't be the first time I danced with lightning," he said, trying to joke, wincing from the burn on his arm. She exhaled hard, rain mixing with tears she didn't realize had fallen. "You just saved everything. The contracts, the company, all of it." He looked at her, exhausted. "Wasn't saving that," he said. "Was saving what you're trying to build." For a moment neither spoke. The storm began to fade, thunder rolling into the distance. She looked at him and whispered, "You're extraordinary." He smiled weakly. "I'm just doing what my father taught me." As the first responders arrived, as the lights inside returned to laughter and applause, Sarah stayed right there beside him, drenched, trembling, and for the first time, completely real. If you believe that good men still exist, like this video so more people remember them. That night, the storm didn't take anything away. It revealed what had been there all along, the light inside a man who refused to stop building, even when the world went dark. Now the applause inside the mansion went on long after the lights returned, but outside, the rain had washed away all sound. The celebration belonged to everyone else. The silence belonged to David. He sat on the ground near the generator, body trembling, rainwater mixing with streaks of soot. His hands shook as he tried to wipe his face, but he couldn't tell what was sweat, what was blood, and what was just the storm refusing to let him go. Sarah knelt beside him, her white dress soaked and ruined. "You need a doctor," she said. "I'm fine," he murmured, trying to stand. He wasn't. His knees buckled halfway up. She caught him before he hit the ground. "Stop pretending," she said, her voice breaking. "You're not made of iron." He managed a faint smile. "That's what my dad used to say." Rick and Tom arrived with towels, eyes wide, faces pale. Rick scratched the back of his neck. "Man, I used to give you hell." David looked at him weakly. "Guess I deserved some of it." Rick shook his head. "No, you didn't." Sarah turned to them. "Call an ambulance." David grabbed her wrist, his voice firm even through the exhaustion. "Don't, please." "David, every cent they charge me, that's rent gone. Ethan's medicine, his school. I can't afford to pass out right now." She looked at him, torn between anger and awe. "You just saved a multi-million-dollar deal and you're worried about rent?" He met her eyes. "Money doesn't keep the lights on inside." For a moment she didn't understand. Then she did. Gloria arrived with an umbrella, breathless. "Lord, look at you, boy. You're gonna get pneumonia." David chuckled faintly. "Already had it once. I know how it feels." "Not funny," she scolded, covering him with the umbrella. They helped him to the booth. His movements were slow, every step a battle. The moment he sat, his whole body slumped, as if gravity had been waiting for him to stop resisting. Inside, the gala carried on. Laughter, champagne, the sound of deals being toasted. For Sarah, it all felt hollow. She couldn't unsee the image of him, half-conscious in the rain, fixing the power while her world watched from behind glass. A few minutes later, she returned with a first aid kit. David tried to protest. "You don't have to." She cut him off gently. "I do." She knelt in front of him and cleaned the burns on his forearm. The cuts were shallow but angry, lined with soot. He flinched when the antiseptic touched the skin. "Sorry," she whispered. He shook his head. "You don't have to apologize for helping." Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped the bandage. "Do you ever stop?" she asked quietly. He smiled. "If I stop, everything catches up to me." There was a pause. The hum of the generator filled the space between them. "Your scholarship starts next week," she said softly. He exhaled, leaning back. "Feels unreal." "You earned it," she said. "Feels like I borrowed it." He looked at her then, really looked, past the power, past the distance, to the tired woman behind all the steel. "You don't have to fix me, Sarah," he said. "You already did enough." She smiled sadly. "Maybe fixing you fixes a part of me too." For the first time they both laughed, not because something was funny, but because it felt human, real. But the moment didn't last. David's breathing grew shallow. His eyes fluttered. "Hey," she said softly. "Stay with me." "I'm okay," he whispered. "Just need a minute." He wasn't okay. His skin had gone pale. The burns, the exhaustion, the lack of sleep. It was all catching up. Sarah stood, panic rising. "Rick, call an ambulance now!" David tried to protest again, but his voice was fading. "Please don't! Ethan!" And then he went still. The radio on the booth table crackled with static, a lonely sound against the rain. Gloria gasped. "Oh, God! David!" Sarah pressed her fingers to his pulse, faint but there. Relief hit like a wave. "He's alive," she whispered. "He's alive." When the ambulance arrived, she rode with him. She didn't care what the guests thought, didn't care about the headlines or the contracts. For the first time in her life, she wasn't managing an image. She was fighting for a person. At the hospital, fluorescent lights painted the world sterile and cold. Nurses moved quickly, voices calm but urgent. Sarah sat in the waiting room, hands clasped tight, her mind replaying every moment, the rain, the sparks, the quiet bravery of a man who fixed what everyone else ignored. Hours passed. The storm outside had faded completely, leaving only silence and the soft hum of hospital machines. Finally, a nurse appeared at the doorway. "He's stable," she said. Sarah exhaled. For the first time in years, she cried. Not out of guilt, not out of stress, but out of something deeper, gratitude. Back in the small hospital room, David lay asleep, pale but breathing evenly. On the chair beside his bed sat his old wallet. The corner of the letter peeked out. Sarah picked it up gently, reading the first line her eyes could catch. "Never stop building, son." She smiled through tears. "Don't worry," she whispered to the empty room. He didn't. Dawn found the hospital wrapped in stillness. Rain streaked the windows, thin and silver, the same rhythm that had followed David his whole life. Machines beeped steadily beside him, each tone proof that he was still here. He woke slowly, eyes heavy, throat dry. For a second, he didn't know where he was. The white ceiling, the smell of antiseptic. Then the memory flooded back. The storm, the generator, the light returning. And then nothing. A voice broke the quiet. "About time you came back." Sarah sat in the corner, her hair loose, her clothes from last night wrinkled. She looked tired, but in a way that made her seem more real. On the chair next to her was a paper cup of coffee and a folded newspaper. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. She smiled. "Apparently I'm not great at taking orders." He tried to sit up. Pain shot through his side. She stood quickly, pressing a hand to his shoulder. "Easy. Doctor says you're lucky. 2nd-degree burns, mild shock, and a blood pressure drop that scared everyone half to death." He exhaled slowly. "So I'm still winning." Sarah handed him water. "You shouldn't joke. You scared me, David." The words landed heavier than he expected. He looked at her, searching for the polished distance she always carried, but it was gone. All that was left was warmth and truth. "I didn't mean to," he said. "I know. That's what made it worse." They sat in silence. A nurse passed by the door, smiling as she saw them, the kind of smile reserved for two people pretending they're not attached. Sarah took a deep breath. I cancelled the next contract meeting. He frowned. Why? Because I realized I was building things that didn't matter. Last night, the only reason anyone could see was because you kept the lights on. Not me, not the company. You. I'm tired of pretending that titles fix people. David chuckled softly. Careful. That sounds like rebellion. Maybe it is, she smiled. You said something before you passed out. Wasn't saving that. Was saving what you're trying to build. What did you mean? He hesitated, thinking. You're trying to build something good, Sarah. I see it. But sometimes you forget who it's for. You don't build houses to make headlines. You build them so people have somewhere to turn the lights on. Her eyes glistened. You really think I can fix that? He smiled faintly. You already know how. You just need to look down sometimes, not up. The door opened quietly. Gloria peeked in, carrying a plastic bag. Someone left this for you, hero. Inside was a small handmade card. Crayon drawing. 2 stick figures under a rain cloud, one holding a flashlight. Underneath, written in shaky letters, "Thanks for keeping the lights on, Dad." David laughed, the sound rough but alive. Sarah smiled, tears spilling freely this time. Ethan made that, Gloria said. He's waiting outside with a chocolate milk bigger than his head. David wiped his eyes. Tell him I'll be out soon. Don't rush, Gloria warned. You've earned a nap and a miracle. She winked and slipped out. Sarah moved closer to the bed. When you're ready, she said, I want you to work on something with me. He raised an eyebrow. What kind of something? A real project. A community power initiative. Affordable solar systems for low-income homes. You design it. I'll fund it. He stared at her, disbelief and hope colliding. Sarah, that's not charity, she interrupted. A partnership. You once said you like fixing things people give up on. So do I. Let's start with that. He smiled, the kind of smile that felt new. Guess we'll need a name for it. She thought for a moment, then said softly, Destined Paths. He nodded. Has a nice ring to it. They both laughed quietly. For a moment, the beeping of the monitor was the only sound in the room. Later that afternoon, David walked slowly down the hallway, arm bandaged, hospital bracelet still on. Ethan ran up and hugged him so hard it hurt. Dad, you're okay. I'm okay, buddy. You fixed the big house again? He knelt, smiling. Yeah, but this time I think the house fixed me too. Sarah watched from the doorway, smiling. For the first time in her adult life, she felt peace. Not the kind that comes from control, but the kind that comes from connection. When they stepped outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. The puddles gleamed like mirrors, and every reflection seemed to whisper the same thing. Rebirth. David looked up at the bright sky. Never stop building, he murmured. Sarah glanced at him. What? Nothing, he said, smiling. Just a promise I keep making. And with that, the man who once studied in the dark walked toward the light. This time, not for himself, but for everyone still trying to find theirs. 2 months later, Nashville wore spring like a new suit. The trees along the river had turned bright green, and the air smelled of rain and promise. On the east side of town, a construction site buzzed with sound. Hammers, laughter, the metallic ring of new beginnings. A banner hung over the gate. Destined Paths Initiative. Clean energy for every home. Reporters and volunteers moved through the half-finished community center. On one side, panels of solar glass leaned against walls. On the other, a group of kids painted murals across a grey concrete wall. Flowers, rooftops, bright suns. And at the center of it all stood David Carter, wearing a yellow hard hat and a faded workshirt with his name stitched over the pocket. The bandage on his arm was gone now, replaced by a small white scar. His eyes were steady again, focused but lighter than before. He bent over a blueprint, explaining something to a young apprentice. See this line here? That's the current path. If you connect it wrong, you overload the inverter. The boy frowned. How do you know it'll hold? David smiled. Because we built it right the first time. A familiar voice came from behind him. "Still teaching people how to listen to machines, huh?" He turned. Sarah stood there, hair tied back, wearing jeans and a construction vest. The expensive suits were gone. She looked like someone who'd learned what dirt under her nails felt like. "Old habits," David said, grinning. "I'm not complaining," she said. "The mayor's arriving soon. We'll need you for the ribbon cutting." "Me?" "Yes, you. This is your project, too." He shook his head, embarrassed. "I'm not the speech type." She handed him a small note card. "Then just say the truth." By noon, the crowd had gathered. Neighbors, workers, city officials, even some of the same investors who once laughed behind their champagne glasses at the mansion. The sun beat warm against the new solar panels, each one catching the light like a mirror of redemption. Sarah stepped to the microphone first. "Thank you for coming. Months ago, this was just an idea, a dream of cleaner energy and fairer opportunities. But dreams don't build themselves. People do, and one of them is standing right here." She looked toward David. He hesitated, then walked up to the platform. The crowd applauded politely at first, then louder when Sarah stepped aside for him. David gripped the microphone awkwardly. He wasn't used to being looked at by so many people. He cleared his throat. "I'm not much for speeches," he began. "I'm a security guard, a mechanic, a dad. I fix things, but sometimes fixing things turns into fixing people. Starting with yourself." He glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "A few months ago, I was studying by flashlight in a booth at the edge of her property. I thought that's all life was going to be, trying to keep the lights on while everyone else moved past me. But then someone noticed. Not because I was loud or lucky, but because I refused to stop trying." The crowd went quiet. Even the reporters lowered their cameras for a second. "My father used to tell me, 'Never stop building, son.' For a long time, I thought he meant houses or machines. But now I know he meant people. We build each other. Every time you help someone stand, every time you look at someone and really see them, you're building something that lasts." He paused, the wind tugging lightly at his shirt. "So that's what we're doing here. Not just building solar grids or clean houses, we're building dignity, one brick at a time." He stepped back from the microphone, and for a second there was silence, then applause, rising like thunder. Sarah smiled, her eyes shining. Ethan, sitting on the front row beside Gloria, jumped up and cheered. The mayor shook David's hand. Reporters swarmed with cameras flashing. Someone asked, "Mr. Carter, how does it feel to be a hero?" David laughed softly. "Heroes don't work alone." Later that afternoon, as the crowd dispersed, Sarah found him standing near the edge of the new solar field, hands in his pockets, watching the panels glimmer. "You did good," she said. He looked at her, smiling. "We did good." "I don't think I ever thanked you properly," she said. "You did, every time you showed up." They watched the sunlight ripple across the panels. It was warm, endless, alive. "Funny," Sarah said quietly. "The man I hired to keep things safe ended up teaching me how to keep things right." He smiled. "Guess Destiny's got its own sense of humor." A light breeze stirred the dust. Behind them, Ethan ran through the field, waving a tiny flag with the project's name. Volunteers laughed. Music played from a nearby speaker, soft, hopeful, the kind of melody that lingers long after the day ends. For the first time, David didn't feel like the man in the shadows. He felt like the light itself, shining on others, steady and true. And somewhere above the noise and applause, he thought he could almost hear his father's voice again, calm and proud. "You did good, son." A year later, the name Destined Paths had spread far beyond Nashville. What began as one small project had become a movement. Teams of volunteers across Tennessee installing affordable solar panels in struggling neighborhoods, teaching kids how to wire circuits, training ex-workers to build systems that could power entire blocks. The media called it the light that started in the dark. David called it a promise kept. Every morning, he woke before sunrise, made breakfast for Ethan, packed 2 sandwiches, one for himself, one for whoever forgot theirs, and headed out in an old pickup truck with the Destined Paths logo painted crookedly on the door. At every sight, people greeted him with smiles and handshakes. Some knew his story, others just knew what he stood for. He didn't give speeches anymore. He didn't need to. His work spoke for him. In the hum of new power lines, in the glow of lights flicking on for the first time in homes that had known nothing but darkness. One day, a reporter visited the newest project on the south side of the city. Cameras followed David as he knelt beside a group of kids, learning to build a small solar grid. "Mr. Carter," the reporter asked, "do you realize how many people you've inspired?" David smiled, adjusting a wire between the child's hands. "Maybe. But inspiration's just another kind of current. You pass it forward or it dies." The kids laughed, repeating his words like a chant. "Pass it forward." In the distance, Sarah watched from under a tree, clipboard in hand, smiling quietly. She didn't run meetings the same way anymore. She didn't hide behind numbers or PR lines. She showed up. She listened. The company had changed because she had changed. Later that afternoon, she and David walked through the new development together. Small houses lined up in neat rows, each powered by clean energy. Families stood on porches waving as they passed. "Hard to believe this all came from one busted flashlight," she said, laughing. David chuckled. "I've learned that light doesn't need to be bright to be strong. It just needs to last." They stopped near a playground where Ethan was helping younger kids climb the slide. The sight made David pause. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think the best thing I could give him was a roof, but maybe it's a reason to believe in himself." Sarah smiled. "He already does, because he sees it every day." They stood there for a while, not saying much. The wind carried the smell of cut grass and warm asphalt. In the sky above, the first streetlight flickered on, powered entirely by solar. That evening, a ceremony was held downtown. The mayor handed David a small bronze plaque engraved with his name and the words, "For lighting the way." He didn't want to go, but Sarah convinced him. When he stepped up to the microphone, he looked out at the crowd, city officials, volunteers, kids, and strangers who'd come just to thank him. "I used to think destiny was something that happened to you," he said. "Turns out, it's something you build. One wire, one hand, one heart at a time." Applause filled the room, but he didn't hear it like noise. It sounded like electricity, alive, flowing through people. After the ceremony, he stood outside with Gloria, who was crying quietly. "Never thought I'd see the day," she said, shaking her head. David smiled. "Me neither." She dabbed her eyes. "Your daddy's probably up there smiling so hard he's gonna crack heaven's ceiling." He laughed, looking up at the sky. "Then I better give him something to keep fixing." As they stood there, Sarah joined them, handing him an envelope. "What's this?" She grinned. "Something you've been putting off long enough." He opened it, and there it was, a university ID card. David Carter, Electrical Engineering Program. He stared at it, speechless. "They approved a transfer," she said. "You'll finish your degree part-time. Classes start in September." He shook his head slowly. "Sarah, after all this time, it's not the end," she said. "It's the next beginning." He smiled, that quiet, grounded smile that had carried him through storms. "Guess I'll need to buy a new notebook." "Make it a big one," she said, laughing. As they walked away, the camera of the world seemed to pull back, the lights of Nashville glowing beneath them like constellations. The skyline shimmered, powered by the project that had started with one man and a broken lamp. And above it all, his father's words echoed once more, softer this time, like a benediction carried on the wind. "Never stop building, son." 15 years later, the world had changed. Nashville's skyline glittered with panels and turbines that caught the morning light like quiet applause. Entire neighborhoods were now powered by clean energy, not just in Tennessee, but across states that had borrowed David Carter's blueprints, his methods, his stubborn simplicity. They called it the Carter model. He still just called it work. David, now in his late 40s, walked through the small community center that bore his father's name. The Samuel Carter Learning Hub. Kids sat at long tables, heads bent over circuit kits, wires tangled like dreams waiting to be untied. On the far wall, a mural stretched across the room. A man fixing a light in the rain, a little boy holding a flashlight beside him. Ethan had painted it. Now 23, he stood near the front of the room teaching a group of middle schoolers how to build small solar lamps. "See that?" Ethan said, tapping a connector. "Doesn't look like much, but when the power goes out, this can mean everything. My dad taught me that." David smiled quietly from the doorway. Outside, the wind carried the sound of construction from the new wing they were adding. Volunteers moved in a rhythm that felt almost musical, the same rhythm his father once used to hum while building in their old garage. He stepped outside into the crisp air. The grass shimmered under the morning sun. Sarah approached, her hair streaked with silver, her stride calm. Time had softened her, but not dulled her. "Thought I'd find you hiding out here," she said. He smiled. "Not hiding, just remembering." She looked toward the mural. Hard not to. They walked side by side toward the benches near the playground, where laughter floated through the air like music. "Can you believe it's been 15 years?" she asked. "Feels like yesterday," he said. "Feels like a lifetime." He looked down at his hands, still rough, but steady. The scars on his arms had faded to thin white lines, the kind that tell stories without needing words. Sarah sat beside him. "You ever miss the mansion?" He chuckled. "Not the house, maybe the booth." "The booth?" she asked, smiling. "Yeah, it was quiet there, simple. No applause, just work and hope." She nodded slowly. "Hope built this." They sat in silence for a while. The wind rustled through the trees. Kids shouted. A distant train horn cut through the hum of the city. David leaned back, gazing at the sky. "You know, I used to think destiny was something you waited for. But it's not. It's something you create in every choice you make. Every time you show up, every time you keep going when no one's watching." Sarah smiled softly. "You taught me that." He turned to her. "No, we taught each other." For a long moment they just watched the children running across the field, their laughter carrying higher than the sound of the turbines spinning in the distance. Ethan approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "Dad, we're setting up the next batch of panels." "You want to do the honors?" David grinned. "Always." They walked together to the new setup, a small row of lights waiting for power. Ethan flipped a switch. The panels caught the sun, and one by one, the lamps began to glow. Applause broke out among the kids. Ethan turned to his father. "Guess we did it again." David laughed. "Guess so." Sarah watched them from a few steps away, eyes shining. In that moment, she understood that the project, the company, even the name Destined Paths, none of it had been about buildings or electricity. It had always been about illumination, about people finding their way out of the dark. Later that evening, after everyone left, David stayed behind to lock up. The sky had turned deep orange, the kind of sunset that melts into everything it touches. He stood in the doorway of the center, looking out at the field. The solar lamps glowed faintly, like stars scattered across the grass. He pulled from his wallet the old letter, creased, faded, almost falling apart now. He unfolded it carefully. The paper trembled slightly in his hands. "Never stop building, son." He smiled, the kind of smile that carries a lifetime inside it. "You were right, Dad," he whispered, "and I didn't." He tucked the letter back into his wallet and took one last look at the glowing field. Each light flickered gently in the breeze, small, imperfect, but alive. Then he turned off the main switch one by one, until only a single lamp remained on near the mural. He stood there for a long time, watching it. Then he whispered the final words to himself, and to everyone who'd ever fought their way out of the dark: never stop building, never stop believing, never stop shining. And as he walked away, the last light stayed on, steady, golden, eternal. Share this story with someone who needs hope today.